said Mexico would never cross the line. They thought decades of trade deals and backroom diplomacy had secured their loyalty. But now, in a geopolitical twist no one in Washington saw coming, Mexico has inked a $2.8 billion deal with China, right as Trump doubles down on tariffs. This isn't just a trade shift, it's a strategic betrayal with global consequences. And for the US, it couldn't have come at a worse time. For years, Mexico played by Washington's rules, signing deals, adjusting quotas, and absorbing economic shocks, all to keep trade flowing under USMCA. But behind the scenes, frustration was building. Mexico's $2.8 billion tomato industry, one of its most valuable exports to the US, had become a bargaining chip in Washington's tariff game. Producers saw themselves being squeezed, not by market forces, but by politics. The final blow came on July 14th, when Mexican officials walked away from a key suspension agreement on tomato pricing, a pact first signed in 2019 to avoid punitive US tariffs. What Washington framed as a negotiation, Mexico saw as economic blackmail. This wasn't just about tomatoes, it was about dignity, dependence, and the growing realization that maybe it was time to look elsewhere. And Beijing was more than ready to answer the call. The final trigger didn't come quietly. It came with a new wave of tariffs straight from Trump's desk, reigniting a trade war that Mexico thought had finally cooled. In early July, Trump reimposed a 17% tariff on Mexican agricultural exports, citing what he called unfair competitive practices and national interest. But in Mexico, it was seen for what it truly was: economic punishment for political independence. Trade officials in Mexico City responded within days, not with words, but with a deal. A $2.8 billion partnership with China, targeting logistics, rail, and tech infrastructure, signed quietly, but with global implications. Trump may have thought he was playing hardball, but from Mexico's perspective, it was no longer a negotiation. It was an escape. Mexico didn't protest. It didn't escalate the tariff battle in kind. Instead, it opened the back door and let China walk right in. The $2.8 billion deal wasn't just about tech or trade. It was about building alternatives. While Washington focused on controlling what couldn't enter the US, Mexico started building new bridges across the Pacific. Chinese partners, backed by state capital, are now securing long-term stakes in Mexican rail lines, port terminals, and digital infrastructure, laying down the very pipelines that could soon carry Asian exports straight into the Americas, bypassing the US altogether. And here's the kicker: some of those goods might end up right back in US markets, relabeled and rerouted. Trump tried to wall off trade. Mexico just walked around it. This wasn't some knee-jerk reaction. Mexico has been quietly laying the foundation for this shift for over 2 years. Under the leadership of President Claudia Sheinbaum, the Mexican government has prioritized port modernization, rail integration, and digital trade routes, especially along the Pacific coast. In Veracruz and Manzanillo, Chinese investment is already flowing in. Shipping yards are expanding. Customs protocols are being streamlined for faster cross-Pacific throughput. Export associations like ANARM, led by Gerardo Tajonar Castro, have been working behind closed doors on market diversification strategies, seeking out buyers in Asia and coordinating multimodal logistics that don't rely on US infrastructure. Even Huawei is rumored to be supplying next-gen trade tech, bringing AI and real-time data routing to Mexico's freight backbone. What looked like a sudden shift was actually a long-engineered detour away from Washington and straight into Beijing's waiting arms. If Mexico pulls this off, it won't stop at tomatoes. This deal could signal the beginning of a mass realignment of agricultural and tech exports away from the US and toward China and Asia. Consider this: tomatoes, $2.8 billion, avocados, $3.2 billion, berries, $2.1 billion, Fresh fruit and produce combined, over $9 billion in annual trade. That's not just Mexican revenue, that's supply chain lifeblood for U.S. grocery stores, food distributors, and restaurants. If even a portion of these exports are redirected or repriced, American consumers will feel it. Prices will go up, availability will go down, and U.S. importers, many already strained by Trump's tariffs on other nations, may be forced to turn to costlier or less reliable alternatives. Meanwhile, Mexico gains leverage, diversified buyers, better prices, political insulation. This isn't just a trade shift. It's a rebalancing of economic power on the continent. This isn't just about tariffs. It's about who gets to control the rules. For decades, Mexico's role in North American trade was clear: produce, export, comply. But now, that narrative is being rewritten. In towns like Culiacan and Michoacan, the tomato is no longer just a crop. It's become a symbol of defiance, of a country tired of being economically cornered and politically lectured. The $2.8 billion China deal isn't just a trade win, it's a sovereignty statement. Mexico is showing the world and the United States that it can chart its own future, choose its own partners, and no longer be a passive player in someone else's economic strategy. And that message is echoing far beyond farm fields. It's hitting Washington like a wake-up call. Meanwhile, back in the US, the consequences are already starting to unfold. Grocery distributors are raising alarms. Importers are quietly renegotiating contracts, and everyday consumers, they're beginning to notice. $4 avocados, $5 tomatoes, prices creeping higher, not because of scarcity, but because of policy miscalculation. What Trump's administration viewed as economic leverage is now boomeranging back in the form of inflation, instability, and political heat. And it's not just economic, it's reputational. From Ottawa to Sao Paulo, world leaders are watching the U.S. lose grip on its own neighborhood. Washington tried to pressure Mexico into alignment. Instead, it may have pressured them into independence. And now, the real question isn't whether Mexico will come back to the U.S. table. It's what happens if they don't. What if this $2.8 billion deal with China isn't the exception, but the blueprint? What if America's most trusted neighbor becomes its most unpredictable variable? Was Trump's hardline tariff strategy a bold defense of U.S. nation power, or the spark that triggered the unraveling of regional control? The fallout has already begun, but the real storm might still be coming. What do you think?